there's no music where an 8-foot instrument is the bass instrument in any form until it came to the string quartet, the concert string quartet. But in all other forms of music, dance music, and of course, jazz, rock, ethnic, everything, the double bass has always been there. And actually, it was there 150 years before the cello.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath. So glad to have you here and check out everything that's been going on for the past decade plus at contrabassconversations.com. I'd love to hear from you. Reach out, send me an email, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Have you got a guest idea? Have you got a topic idea? I'd love to hear from you. And you are going to love today's episode with John Feeney, who's the principal bassist of the American Classical Orchestra and the Orchestra of St. Luke's. I've been wanting to talk to John for a long time for the podcast, but looking on Facebook a couple months back, I found this article that he'd written about the Haydn double bass solos and Haydn symphonies and how they're misattributed to cellists and why that happened. Fascinating article. It's linked to in the show notes. So I immediately read that, got in touch with John, and we set this up. What a great conversation. We go deep into so many topics. What John likes about playing in period groups, how he started to discover that pieces listed as being written for cello were actually originally written for bass. We dig really deep into that. How Dragonetti and Bottazzini kind of put a dagger through the heart of the 5-string violone. There's so much more bass music for students to enrich their palates with than they realize, and why it's kind of silly that so many auditions require solo Bach for cello suites. And this is fascinating. We dig into this. We dig into so much more. And you're going to hear John playing throughout the episode. I've got some excerpts from his wonderful YouTube channel, and there's a link to that in the show notes as well. And I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsor, D'Addario Strings. We've got a giveaway going for their hybrid, orchestral, and pizzicato helicore strings. If you go to contrabassconversations.com/strings, you can get the info on that. And D'Addario Strings are manufactured, designed, crafted in New York, here in the United States. Thank you for sponsoring the podcast. And I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with John Feeney. You've got that video along with the article, that YouTube video talking about gut and misperceptions. And I think I'd love to geek out on that if you're okay with that, because sure. I think that there are a lot of misperceptions, and probably most of us who aren't living in that world, there's a lot we don't know or don't realize. Yeah. Well,
it's there really isn't any reason for there to be a division of the world.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's not, they are not that strange, and they, in the midst of an ensemble, there's just a fantastic clarity to them, and warmth, and also just range of articulation and dynamic that can be brought in, and there could be other people in the section who are using steel or plastic, and it just becomes a richer overall sound complex to have that dimension mixed in amongst them.
Sure.
So I use them for everything. So like this week, I'm playing with American Classical Orchestra, opera by Rameau. Mm-hmm. Les Indes Galantes, the gallant Indians, and it's close to 4 hours long. And we start tomorrow. We have 3 rehearsals.
Oh, wow. Okay.
and it's one bass. I'm playing all the rest. And Rameau is it's famously difficult. Not only technically for fast passage work, but because of also the stylistic demands of it. None of the eighth note passages are just simply played as eighth notes. All the notes are swung.
Okay.
So that's, very jazzy. That's going to be challenging. So I go in and I do that at 8/4/15. And then next week with St. Luke's, we have a concert at Carnegie where I'm playing Lutoslawski and Brahms' German Requiem. The Lutoslawski is a piece for string orchestra. What's it called? Oh, yeah, Music Funèbre.
Mm-hmm.
And, some extreme high register stuff and all that. So I'll be doing that at A440 with gut strings. Mm-hmm. And then that evening, after the concert, I have to drive down to Washington, D.C., where I'm doing an opera, Léonore, but not the usual Léonore, It's by Pierre Gaveau.
Okay.
And, so it's Baroque French opera, and that will be at probably 4:15, if not 392, the pitch.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to be using the same bass and the same strings for all of those settings,
And just retuning as necessary.
Yeah, just going down. I always, after I finish playing, I always take my strings down at least a quarter to a half tone, because the worst thing is if they go sharp.
Okay.
So I don't want them getting stretched out like that. I've found that I can go into any setting with these strings, and it's just, I got to the point where I recognize that this is my voice, this is the way I want to sound, and I'm also at the point, where if people don't like it, then, they can call someone else. I'm going to follow my own dream. Well,
I love hearing that you're playing Lutoslawski and gut string. I think that's one of those misperceptions, right? Is that you would not take a bass with gut strings into a setting like that. But it's something you mentioned in that video that I thought was really interesting. I think you were comparing the palette of gut strings, or at least your bass with gut strings, kind of like the bassoon or oboe. Am I remembering that right? Or like there's a blend?
Well,
yeah.
Well, yeah, there is a blend, and there's, especially like when you play, Baroque music,
mm-hmm.
The Baroque organ has, when you press the key of a Baroque organ, there's a sound that precedes the pitch.
Yeah.
And that is referred to as a chiff.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll hear, cha, cha, there's a little chiff beforehand, and you get that the enunciation of the front end of the note
mm-hmm.
with gut strings has this articulation built into it,
yeah,
which has a little bit of that chiff sound. The thing that in that interview, I didn't know where that was going, or
right,
didn't realize it was going to be released, particular, and the way they edited it and everything. But I think that was excerpted from what I was getting at was one of the things that I really, really love about the period bands is the intonation, because the instruments, the modern instruments have been tailored to agree with the well-tempered, even-tempered piano.
Yeah.
So that the thirds and sevenths are all sharp according to what natural intonation is.
Sure.
So like when you're playing harmonics, those thirds and sevenths are quite low.
Right.
And when I tune my Viennese violone, the F sharp string, I love to demonstrate this to people. I'll tune it to the tuner, the way everyone in the orchestra tunes.
Mm-hmm.
And then both the A and the F sharp and then the D and the F sharp together sound terrible.
Yeah.
You have to lower that F sharp to get it to the sweet spot. So in these period bands, the winds, the horns, they have their open and closed notes, and the pitch of the natural flutes and the wind instruments hasn't been tweaked to be so readily even-tempered. So you get these chords sounding that are so beautiful in a just a new way. I mean, like doing Mendelssohn Midsummer Night's Dream with a period band. It's just when you hear the wind opening,
mm-hmm.
you never want to hear it with a modern orchestra again.
Yeah.
It's just so incredible. you know.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, excerpted from within in that talk.
Okay.
Know?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's funny how your offhand words can sometimes become encapsulated like that in someone else's, documentary vision. So
yeah. Well, the woman who cut it is lovely and very smart and everything, but they have to cut some things out. And I kind of wish they had done some other things, like every shot of me above the neck. I could have done that. Little flash out there,
right.
Yeah.
When did you discover period playing? I mean, was that right from I know you studied with David Walter. Maybe just take me on the journey of how that came into your life.
Okay, so I started playing the Spoleto Festival, I guess in the 80s, early 80s, early to mid 80s. So I was over in Italy, and I went to a Riccardi, and there I found this beautiful Riccardi edition of 21 sonatas for cello and bass by Boccherini. And so, I was like, oh my God, look at this, and I bought it. And then I found out later that, indeed, the bass part, it was called basso, but there was no figures. Mm-hmm. And I found out that Boccherini, his father was a bassist. And Boccherini performed all of these with his father. And, but now if you hear any recordings, they'll be done with keyboard and a second cello. Mm-hmm. Klaus Stoll recorded them with his cellist in Berlin. He recorded a couple of them with just the bass and cello to some, good effect. But anyway, so as I had a wonderful cellist who I was working with regularly back then, Richard Scher, who was the youngest principal cellist of the Boston Symphony in history. And then he went on to other things. But as I was going through them and the bass parts, I got to some of the sonatas where I realized, his father couldn't have been tuned in fourths here, because he had double stops written that you just couldn't play with an instrument tuned in fourths.
Sure.
So then I started thinking, well, gee, how should I tune this? And so I think it was one of the famous sonatas. I think it was number 5 in A major. So I wound up tuning my bass A, E, A, E. Mm-hmm. And the whole bass was ringing A major, and it was great. It was kind of like a revelation. I said, oh boy, I can tune pretty much any way. And then I went to this string maker, D'Addario, Richard Coco, who was up in Newburgh, New York. And I went in, and I just brought my bass, and he just got out all of these gut strings, just, which had like almost no designation, what they were going to be for or anything, but just all different widths and tensions possible. And he just gave them to me. I mean, I'm talking like 100 strings.
Wow.
And so then I started experimenting with them, and I realized, wow, the instrument sounds great, and I can pretty much tune any way I want to. So that, that led me to, I used to play these chamber music concerts with Paula Rosin, and she wanted me to play a Vivaldi bassoon concerto. So I found one of the concertos, and I wound up tuning the bass with a higher tuning, a high C string. So that was what led me to the gut strings. Prior to that, much earlier, I had started discovering that pieces that were listed as having been written for the violoncello in the classical period when I went to the original sources, whenever I could, I was at libraries, when I, not trusting the card catalog, I'd go to the racks, and I discovered this trend that the original edition, and if you were lucky enough to see a score, in these classical works, the original designation would be basso. And then later on, you would see basso and then in parentheses, violoncello in smaller lettering.
Oh, okay.
And then, then the next incarnation would be violoncello with basso in parentheses in the smaller lettering. And then finally, the next edition, you would see violoncello and there was no mention of basso. And so I discovered that this was happening to just like so much music in the classical era. And, I didn't have access to the kind of things that you have now with the internet. I mean, it's incredible the amount of sites. There's a fantastic Schubert site where you can, look at a lot of his manuscripts. And, there's so many manuscripts available. And so, over a period of like 35 years, I started piecing together a knowledge that the bass had its own very vibrant identity without being, just this extension of the cello.
Yeah.
It had its own separate identity. In fact, last week, I spend a lot of time, I would say every week, scouring the internet for music and looking at scores and things like that. And last week, I made a discovery in Schubert. There's this piece called Gesang der Geister über den Wasser. Mm-hmm. So the song of the ghosts over the Wasser, which I guess is a river or something. But I was looking at this score, and it was fantastic. The pieces for 2 violas, 2 cellos, a double bass, and then 4 tenors and 4 bass singers. Mm. And I just thought, wow, and here's another example. And the bass part is preeminent in it. It begins the piece by itself, and it's on its own path through the score, not just doubling the cello. And I thought, wow, what a great piece. And then I found a performance of it, quite lovely performance, film performance on YouTube. Mm. And so I sent this to the conductor of the American Classical Orchestra, Tom Crawford, who's great. I love this orchestra because he's very open to programming ideas and, it's very collaborative with the musicians. Yeah. And so I sent him links to the score and to this performance. And he got back to me right away and he said, I usually feel we have similar tastes in music and everything, but he said, but this goes beyond anything. He said, when I received your email about this piece by Schubert that no one knows, I was looking at the score of it. And
wow.
And next year he's doing the Brahms Alto Rhapsody with this incredible young singer Avery Amaro, who is already acknowledged as one of the 5 greatest contraltos of all time. And she's like 20 or something and gorgeous. But so he's planning on doing this Alto Rhapsody, Brahms Alto Rhapsody with her next year. And he was thinking, well, that ends with the male choir. And he, what else would I do? And then he came across this really obscure work, but the timing of it was so cosmic. So yeah. I'm really happy. So I think we're probably going to do it next year, and
wow,
I'll be enjoying that.
Oh, how cool is it? What a fascinating coincidence. Talk about being on the same wavelength.
I know. He was just so completely freaked out about it, blown away. It's like I was tempted to say, well, I've had your house bugged and wired.
And so it was in the classical era. And it was the publishers. That's kind of how the bass started to get sublimated into this like violoncello / basso role. Was it because of the publishers that happened, or because
an instance of that is with the Haydn Opus 9 quartets.
Mm-hmm.
Haydn originally published them as quartet divertimenti, and they were published, and the bass part bears the designation basso.
Mm-hmm.
And it was later the publisher wanted to add them to Haydn's quartet portfolio.
Oh, okay.
And Haydn did, after the Opus 1s and Opus 9s, did settle on the violoncello, and you can tell by looking at the part. This is not for the double bass, this is for the cello. But these earlier works are in the divertimento style.
Yeah.
He chose to designate basso, meaning that it could be realized by a cello or by a bass.
Mm-hmm.
Given the nature of its divertimento form, the bass would have been the preferred choice.
Okay.
And it is the instrument that brings these pieces best to light. But the publisher wanted to include them in the quartet catalog, so he dropped the name quartet divertimenti, and he just called them string quartets, and then he changed it to violoncello.
Okay, making it easy to fit it into a pre-existing box.
Well, yeah, and my take on this is that the bass was like incredibly, hugely popular, especially the Viennese tuning, all of those concertos that were composed with that tuning and that knowledge of the sound world that 5-string thirds tuned instrument created. That's what Mozart wrote, Perquesta for and had in mind. There was and there's also a wealth of like very virtuosic chamber music for this instrument.
Yeah.
But the advent of the modern concept of the string quartet, not the divertimento or serenade quartet, which would be two violins, viola, and bass. The new sound, there's a German term for it, new sound, neu, whatever, Gesange.
Yeah.
That's new song. But anyway, the quartet was then becoming a serious work of music meant not to be played at social functions or for people to, be just enjoying themselves and perhaps mulling around, having champagne and talking and perhaps dancing, but the quartet became destined for serious listening and concerts hall. It was less related to dance forms.
Okay.
And the cello was the instrument for this. And the quartet, this new sound, became a total fascination, and it became the measure of a composer. Like, how someone like Beethoven or Mozart or Haydn could, in those 4 parts, create these masterpieces of inventiveness and groundbreaking. They were pulling away from the traditional minuet form, and they were creating new works, and it was a total fascination. It just eclipsed the earlier stuff, and it was all the rage. I mean, it's kind of like, if you think of, I made the analogy in a blog of the Beatles kind of exploding onto the scene, and how then every garage had its own band, and everybody had to have electric guitar, electric bass, and a drum set.
Yeah.
So that happened, and the thing that happened simultaneously with it was Dragonetti, and the onset of baton conductors.
Okay.
So, prior to the baton conductor, a larger orchestra would, at the center of it, have the keyboard and concertmaster with a double bass standing, and the concertmaster would be standing, and the cello. And so they were right there at the center of the orchestra, directing it physically and, musically. And so when the orchestras got bigger, you needed to have the baton conductor. And also these pieces became less dance-oriented and more complex. So the baton conductor enters, the double bass is relegated to the outskirts. And then Dragonetti, with his 3 strings, was able to do what people with 5 strings couldn't do. And he was doing it with his Gaspar, the solo, with such a powerful range of dynamics. And this was the sound that these more modern works, Beethoven symphonies, and late Mozart, late Haydn, and Mendelssohn, this was the sound that they were requiring from their double basses now. So Dragonetti and then Bottesini kind of put a dagger through the heart of the 5-string violone, and the composers began favoring this more powerful but less virtuosic instrument.
Yeah.
And so the players, the 5-string instrument kind of disappeared, and as far as its presence in chamber music and solo music, well, very few, comparatively few people could do on a 3-string instrument what they used to be able to do with the 5-string. So and also all of that literature specifically composed for the Viennese violone really can't be done justice unless you're using a Viennese violone with that tuning.
Right.
They just fall on their face.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of how it all happened. And then, so from there, it wasn't just publishers, it was editors.
Okay.
Who no longer knowing about the existence of the Viennese violone and having, when the music disappeared back then, it disappeared. There were no recordings. It was as though it never had existed. So when these 18th century, mid to late 18th century musicologists and editors would see a piece that had a profound technical solo presence, and it bore the designation double bass or violone, they would they go, no, that's just got to be a mistake, and they just would change it to cello.
Oh, okay.
So, and the ultimate witness to that is the Haydn symphonies. There's bass solos in symphonies 6, 7, 8, 31, 45, and 72. And every single one of them, myriad times, by greatly respected musicologists / editors in urtext editions. Every single one of those symphonies was given over to the cello, with the exception of 45. And that is because number 45 is the Farewell Symphony, and the cellist couldn't leave the stage twice.
Okay, yeah.
But that's the only one that they left alone. Once you realize that and that like they'll have like H. Robbins Landon, hugely respected musicologist, what he did to the bass, and in these urtext editions where he has pages of errata in the beginning, mentioning that he put a dot over this note in the second violins because in the exposition there was a dot in the manuscript from Schwerin, and so I have taken it. So he has to note anything that wasn't exactly in the manuscript. But he never says anything about this quantum liberty he's taken by just changing the bass part to the cello part. And the other thing that happens is then, Haydn wrote it so that the bass part is high, and the cello part is in its lowest register. Well, if you reverse those roles, the voice leading makes absolutely no sense. And so, these symphonies, they've been recorded this way and performed this way and diminished that way. It's amazing that this will happen at the hands of somebody who's so highly regarded and respected in the form of a text edition and then just not acknowledged.
Yeah.
And then, 6 years later, or 8 years later, this is 1956 edition, I believe, and then in 1964 he comes out with another edition of 6, 7, and 8, and he restores the bass solo.
Oh.
And repairs his damage. Once again, though, without saying a word about it. But that's why and that's the whole reason that there was a new edition that came out, was he realized that, scholarship was going to catch up with him, and he didn't want to leave this thing that he had done out there without repairing it.
Yeah.
But it was all done tacitly, and it's been done by numerous editors. This guy Eusebius Mazashewski. It's just all rife throughout the literature, and it's the fact is that there's so much music for the bassists, young players, to be enriched by, and become more deeper musicians to fully understand their role in music in this classical era. I mean, to play these Opus 9 quartets by Haydn and the Salzburg Divertimenti of Mozart, Mozart Flute Quartet in C and D major, and the oboe quartet, the B-flat viola quintet, the horn quintet. The list goes on. And, yet the double bass is a relative stranger to any chamber music festival.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So this is rich tradition you're describing, and I think somebody's perception, right, is just that, we're just sitting there in the back playing, reinforcing the cello quietly. But just everything you're describing, we've been this integral part of music tradition as a major voice, going back hundreds of years. Yeah. Right.
Well, what it also has done, I fear, is by it should have a rich place in all of the conservatories. Mm-hmm. And all of these young people should be claiming this music for themselves so that they develop a better understanding of their true and most profound role in chamber music. Like playing these pieces, the serenades and divertimenti of Mozart, all of those divertimenti for two horns and serenade quartet, two violins, viola, and bass. Mm-hmm. To play these pieces without the cello and to have that open space there. And this is another reason that the composers wrote this way, is that, think of the horn quintet. With the cello, realizing the basso part, you've got two violas, the horn, and the cello all in the same register. So it's like a traffic jam of voicing. With the bass, you open up that 8-foot register, and the piece immediately becomes so much more spacious. Mm-hmm. I always knew this instinctively, but it was proven to me one time about, I guess, maybe 25 years ago. I was playing one of the divertimenti for two horns and strings. I think it was 334, and the cellist was parked in a meter.
Okay.
So we were doing it with bass and cello,
Yeah.
And she's a wonderful player and everything, but I noticed, and my colleagues noticed, that every time she got up to go down and feed the meter, we would continue to rehearse. And as soon as the 8-foot wasn't in the tone picture, the whole piece just opened up and became this clear, free, wonderful, totally different work. And then she would come back and then seal up that 8-foot register. And it's just like, the bassist can't play with the range that they would and should be playing, and the cellist can't either. Mm-hmm. But, it's like unthinkable that there would be a bass without a cello.
Right.
But yet that is the way it was. And so my fear is that absent this incredible enriching environment of music making that bass players lose their way, because they're coming into a world where politically they are, at the bottom of the heap. Many of the chamber music festivals are run by cellists.
Yeah.
But they're in a position of weakness and also haven't benefited from being steeped in all of this rich chamber music and developed their sound in terms of what is required by them to bring these pieces to such great life, that they have to seek other ways of gaining acceptance. And one of them is kind of to sound like a cello and to be deferential to the cello. And it just, to me, I find it appalling that so many of the orchestras in this country require for an audition you to play Bach cello suites in the cello register. I mean, this doesn't exist anywhere in music. Why would you pass over what is obviously the glory range of your instrument? And, Bach would never have written the cello suites for the cello playing up an octave.
Right. Yeah, great point. Yeah.
And so I find it's unnatural. But I understand it because people don't realize that there's all this wonderful stuff for them to play. And it's just it's really got to be reclaimed. I'm having a friend of mine has been working on for several months translating Karl Barr's article on the history of the double bass in basso in chamber music and in the works of Mozart. And it's never, it's been out for 50 years, but it was never translated. So I'm getting it translated, and I'm going to release it, the translated version, to the public. But I am going to also, I disagree with Karl Barr in many areas and can prove my assertions and disprove his. And the main place where I see that he goes off the edge, and where so many people go off, is by saying that, well, this couldn't have been for the bass because it goes below a low F natural, or it goes below an E. It's just totally a false assumption.
Yeah. And
we know that from, my God, in Mozart, the low Cs are everywhere. They're everywhere in height. And they're even Johann Zelenka, in chamber music, wrote low Cs, and he was a bassist. Mm-hmm. So you can't, obviously he could play them if he wrote them.
Right.
And then when Zelenka died, Leopold Mozart was 26. And Leopold had already written chamber music for the double bass, which he called basso. So there's a piece for bass with two cellos and a myriad of other instruments. And this is just, very close to when Zelenka passed. And so Leopold has low Cs. So to assert that then the works of Mozart or Schubert or, Beethoven, or Haydn, because they go down to a low C, that it couldn't be for the bass. This just has no basis in, in reality. And they'll also say, well, because of it's in a chamber music context. But, the way to show that is to perform them and see. And it's like, I have my own group. Well, it's a serenade orchestra, which is the serenade quartet, mm-hmm. and plus two horns. So we play all of this repertoire, and then the quartet has its own concert life too. And, when I play these pieces, it's like you do the Salzburg Divertimenti, and the pieces are just so much more evocative and profound with a double bass. It's just incredible. And so I really hope that that people, start accessing it more and more. And actually, people are starting to. that's kind of my mission, you know?
Yeah, no, and what a mission. I mean, and so have you seen, in the last maybe 10, 20 years, have you started to see a sea change? Are people starting to, because I mean, I think about me growing up and going to school, and my perception was always like, oh yeah, we have the maybe 3 or 4 chamber pieces. We can play Dvorak quintet, Trout. And then you start to realize, like what you're describing, there's just this wealth. I mean, this integral wealth going back hundreds and hundreds of years. Are you noticing a change at all in perception?
Well, yeah. Heather Miller-Lardan thanked me. She's been performing the flute quartets.
Yeah.
And, I did a recording of them a few years ago. It's the first recording where the 2 quartets for cello are done by a wonderful cellist, Loretto Sullivan, and the 2 for bass, for basso, are I play on. And it's the first time that anyone ever dared to record them that way. But there it is, A number of years ago, and there's a YouTube of it up there, I did the Mozart oboe quartet with great Steve Taylor on oboe. And he never wants to do it with the cello again. And so he's done it many times since then now with other bassists.
Yeah.
So, and it's great to have the advocacy come from, the oboist or the flutist or the hornist. But, people, the other thing you have to realize is you're going to take some heat from some people.
Yeah.
Because people just don't like to have the boat rock. And it's amazing how, my God, the cellists, they have such a rich literature.
Right.
And so many of them get so upset over this. And it's like, the world, it's not all cello. It never was that way. And so I've taken some heat. I did, after we did the recording, we appeared at something called the Flute Fair in New York. And Bart Feller, our flutist, wanted me to say, to talk to the audience a little bit. So we played one of the quartets, I think the D major, and I started talking to the audience, and I said, well, are there any comments or questions? And this woman shot up out of her chair, and she said, yes. I just want to say that every time I heard the bass, I wanted to throw up.
Oh, really?
And I said, yeah, that's what I said. I said, exactly. Really? I said, well, even when I played in the 8-foot register, she said, yes, whenever I heard it, I wanted to throw up. And I said, well, perhaps several years with a good therapist might help you out, with that. Just, but afterwards, and my colleagues were looking, they were staring in complete and utter disbelief.
Yeah.
And I really think that, this is another example of kind of the political bottom of the heap treatment. I think she probably would never have said such a thing to a violinist or, a cellist. But anyway, afterwards, my colleagues were horrified. They were horrified at the moment of it. But afterwards, I have to say that, she was alone in this audience with that feeling. Everyone else was absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
And but you get the people who hate it, and they're the ones who are going to jump all over it. So, but it's certainly worth the trade-off to have to field the occasional hard-line skeptic and somebody who just absolutely, tradition, even though it's a false tradition of 100 years with music that's 250 years old, it's worth bucking tradition.
Well, and how great just to get, like you were describing with people finding these and seeing them on YouTube. I mean, just getting recordings and getting videos out there with that. And then people discover these pieces and they see the bass up there instead of the cello. You know, they see this kind of instrumentation. Over time, hopefully that will help too. It just becomes the norm because that's when people look something up, that's what they'll see.
Right. Well, and they are doing this in Europe. The same concert, the same player, Steve Taylor, his wife is a cellist, and she's actually the cellist that I was talking about with the horn K334. Mm-hmm. Well, a couple of years ago, we did on this oboe concert, the quartet concert, we did K334, and Steve's wife Lindy played it, but she was very demure about it. And they said when I came in for the first rehearsal, which was at their house, they said, well, we can't believe it. We heard this Tone Koopman recording of K334, and they used a bass with no cello. And Steve said, yeah, it sounds great, and so they are doing this more and more in Europe. And, mm-hmm. And also the bass, you would never, there's no music where an 8-foot instrument is the bass instrument.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. I mean, in any form, there's no, except until it came to the string quartet, the concert string quartet. Yeah. But in all other forms of music, dance music, and of course, jazz, rock, ethnic, everything, the double bass has always been there. And actually, it was there 150 years before the cello, and it was at the center of consciousness in European civilization in music making. It's a really fascinating pairing that the most advanced machine of the 15th and 16th century. The most complex and advanced machine was the great church organ. Mm. And, the Catholic Church, unlimited funds, was building these. And the problem was that as it became more and more complex, fitted with more stops and sound effects and larger pipes, 16-foot and then even 32-foot pipes, the problem with that was that its appetite for air was a practical problem because you'd have a bellows off in another room, perhaps down below, a hose going down below, and 6, maybe more men holding a transom bar, pumping away to feed this organ's huge appetite from the 16-foot and 32-foot pipes. So not totally unpractical for rehearsing. Maybe every once in a while you could power the damn thing up with the help of 6 to 10 men. But so the church charged their engineers with a solution to this, and the solution was a powerful bowed string instrument to play the low notes, so that they could just have someone next to the organist pumping, and he'd play the upper lines and not have to use the 16-foot pipes. So you had in these churches, the double bass was alongside the organ. 150 years before any formal orchestra ever existed, and there it was at the center of the populace's experience of hearing music, and the first treatises on double bass playing are by organists.
Oh,
but because the organists had to play the bass.
Yeah.
So that the apprentice would play the double bass while his teacher would play the organ.
Wow.
And then the apprentice would then become the organist, and the next apprentice would have to learn the double bass to provide this foundation. And my first encounter with this was, my God, it was like 35 years ago. I got booked to do a church gig. I go over, it was a church over on the east side, and I walk in, and the choir is there, and the organist is there, and I see one music stand, and I'm going, well, where's the rest of the band? And they put this chart in front of me, and I had never heard of Heinrich Schütz before, but this is one of his masses, and it is scored for organ, double bass, and choir.
Wow.
And there are many pieces like this. And, so that was my first. And, if you ever play in church with an organ, I mean, it's like there's such a natural combination that the bass is amplified by playing with the organ. And it's just a wonderful thing to play all Bach cantatas and all that stuff. But so anyway, there it is, like the bass, and it wasn't until much later on that the church would allow instruments that they considered profane, like the violin, into the church. Because these were, the viols and violins, they were considered, instruments of the street. And, so the double bass was always there at the center of music making.
How cool that the organ that the apprentice was the bass player and then moved on to become the organist. I did not know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, Pretorius. It's something I think from 1615 is the first his first treatise on it. I think it's Syntagua Musicum or something like that. There's I think another one dating from 1511. But anyway, yeah. So the first treatises, that's it. It's done by organists. So that's your proof. And this is, like 150 years before the construction of what they would call a cello.
Man, that is so cool. Hey, Judd, I'm looking through these, I put out on Facebook, hey, I'm talking with John Feeney and any questions. And I think I'm looking at this list. I think we talked about like every single thing on this list, which is awesome. Except one, Sue Lipkins, Sue, I'm sure. She was wondering about rosin and what you use on gut strings, like what's used or what you use.
I use pops.
You just use pops. Okay. Cool.
and I use Sue Lipkin's hair.
Oh, you do? Oh, all right.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So, it's the thing that's different about gut strings is because it is one substance, it's just much more reactive. So everything you do with the bow, the slightest thing is barometrically read by the string, and it just responds to everything you do. So the typical thing for someone who hasn't played them is they will apply too much pressure because they haven't dealt with such a hair trigger, sensitive device as a gut string. And so it's really it's just a thing of following the tone to the most resonant response, and with the gut strings, the starting point you discover is less pressure.
Okay, and
that's one of the things I love about them too. Is it's less pressure to activate them. It's less pressure on the instrument itself, so the instrument is more resonant, and it's less tension on your left hand, and you feel like you can just fly all over the fingerboard.
Thank you, John. What a pleasure to have you on the show. That's going to do it for another episode, except I have one thing, and this is the only place I am letting anyone know about this. I'm always fascinated by who listens to the end of these episodes. So I have written my book, Winning the Audition. You can find it at winningtheaudition.net, blah, 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 blah. You probably know about this if you're someone who listens to the end of these podcasts. So I just finally got it out on Audible. It took me way longer than I thought to do that. And I am in need of some reviews on Audible. I have a set of codes for a free download of my book. You don't have to sign up for, I don't know how that works exactly, but you don't have to do the Audible trial or anything like that. I think even if you're an Audible customer, you can just enter that code and get the book, I think. Anyway, what I'm saying is if you're interested in checking out a free copy of the audiobook for winning the audition, send me an email, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Just say, hey, Jason, can you give me a code? First come, first served. And the only thing I ask is if you listen, would you be kind enough to leave some sort of rating and review on Audible? I would super appreciate it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book. It's me reading my book. It's fun to write a book. It's really hard to write a book. And it's great to have the audiobook version. I learned a lesson putting this together. If anyone out there is thinking about doing a book, record the audiobook version before you release the print version. And here's why. It forces you to read every word in your book, and you will catch typos, wrong words. Oh my goodness. I caught, I think, like 22 typos. And I had combed through that book so many times and had other people look at it. That's a good way to catch typos. I will shut up now. If you want a code, let me know. Thank you, John, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.